Hey everyone, welcome to Some Seminarians Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Today we have Diego Castellanos with us, myself, Moses Castro, and you'll notice someone not a seminarian, Bishop Gary. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
We're happy to have you. So we just wanted to take an opportunity to kind of talk to our audience about the Some Seminarians Podcast and the origin and where it came from, and how we're really excited about this initiative to speak to the people of the Archdiocese of San Antonio as seminarians, as potential and future priests, as we pray, as we discern our vocations, and share a little bit about how we got here and where we are with the podcast.
It's good.
Right. So
I think maybe the first question would be, after you were installed here in the Archdiocese of San Antonio, what was then like your mindset or your thought process of, okay, like Vocations needs to do something, maybe social media, like how did that go about in your mind?
Sure. And it might have been just maybe a week before I was ordained, but certainly immediately following. The Archbishop brought me together and we kind of started talking about, okay, what are your assignments going to be? What are you going to concentrate on? And he said right away, he said, we really need some assistance with vocations.
Right.
And so he said, what would we call it? And so we kind of thought together, and Bishop Mike, we all kind of made suggestions. Finally, we kind of came up, Episcopal Vicar for Vocations and Priestly Formation.
Wow.
We just made it up.
Sounds good.
So it started kind of unfolding, and then I asked him at one day, a few weeks after that, point blank, I said, Archbishop, are you asking me to be the vocation director and the director of seminarians? Because that's a very particular vocation. Do you want me to oversee, or are you asking me to be the vocation director?
Right.
And he says, I'm asking you to be the vocation director. I want to be the director of seminarians. Okay, so I got it now.
Right.
And so I can do that because I did it in 1990. I was ordained in 1988 for the Diocese of Victoria. In 1990, ordained 2 years. I was 26 when I was ordained.
Wow.
And so I was 28 years old, and I was named the vocation director.
Wow.
Some of the seminarians that I was going to oversee were older than I.
Oh, yeah.
So that was really different.
Interesting dynamic.
So, yeah, definitely. So I don't know if that was the best thing, but I did enjoy. I've always enjoyed vocation work. And knowing that we're all vocation directors, everyone is called to really encourage and pray for and just simply ask, man, if they've ever thought about being a priest. That's what my grandparents did. That's what my parents did.
Right.
So when the Archbishop asked me to do that, I said, I can do that. I did it before. He says, oh, I know you did it before. So I'm excited. I mean, the 19 of you are incredible.
Oh,
you have brought me so much energy and excitement. And then so when he said, when I got it down, narrowed down exactly what I'm going to do, my responsibilities, I knew we had to start working. The fact is we have, as I've said so often in confirmation masses and elsewhere in the Archdiocese, we have a wonderful local church. The Archdiocese of San Antonio is a beautiful, blessed, faith-filled Archdiocese, historic, wonderful people. But we also need more priests. The priests we have are great men, wonderful servants of God. But we need more because we're growing. We have 2 new parishes being developed right now. The Archdiocese, more people are moving here. Many of them are Catholic. And so we need priests. Right. And so I've been just working on how do we create that culture of vocations. And so I knew all of you are so talented. You're a different generation than mine. We promoted vocations a lot differently in the 1990s. Right. And I knew we had to try something different. Of course, you think about social media.
Right.
So that's when I just kind of gave you the idea, and you just really took the ball, and you've been running ever since.
Yeah, it's been an exciting journey. Certainly we got the challenge from Bishop Gary and the vocation staff to create some social media content, right? One of those was a podcast. So definitely the seminarians gathered together and started brainstorming different ideas on how we can approach that. And here we are now. We're on Some Seminarians Podcast. And what makes this podcast a little bit different than others is that we want to showcase, if you will, all of the San Antonio seminarians to the people of God here locally in the diocese, allowing them the opportunity to get to know us, right? So Diego, what kind of things then do we have planned for the podcast and episodes and concepts and content?
Right. So there's a lot of things that, like you said, when we were thinking about, okay, what do we want to do? What do we want to do with this, and what direction do we want to take it in? And I think the overwhelming thought was that we need to show how human the seminarians are.
Yeah.
That we're all human, that we all come from families, that we're not just like picked off of a tree or something, but rather that we're just like any other normal guy our age, which the ages kind of do vary, but it's still a bunch of young men getting together, doing something that they feel called to do, called from God to do. And so with that, we're like, okay, well, how do we show the human aspect of seminarians?
Right.
And so I think the first thing was like, okay, well, some guys kind of like sports. It's like, okay, sports. Some guys like cooking. Okay, so it was just that, like Bishop was saying, like we have a great group of guys that are so talented. So it's about showing their talents. And so it wasn't necessarily like, oh, what do we think people find interesting? It was, oh, what do these guys like?
Right.
What do these guys like doing? And from that, we were able to decide, okay, based off their talents, we can kind of decide, okay, let's group these guys that kind of like sports, or let's group these guys that kind of like food or cooking, to put them together to make a video, to be like, well, these are the experts, because I wouldn't put myself in certain categories that I'm not an expert in, because then I'll just be like, well, what am I going to talk about? But rather like, okay, this guy has a talent in this certain area, let's bring him in. So some of the ones that you'll be seeing hopefully in the future, if you haven't already seen, are such as some categories such as movies. We have sports and fitness. We have one about dating and relationships. We have some in Spanish as well, about the life in the seminary, as well as in English, saints, obviously. So there's so many things, and there's so many things that we also want to do, which is something that we would like to engage the audience and ask, okay, what would you like to see us talk about? Because really, whatever people put in the comments, we're going to have a guy that's interested in that. Whether it's some of the maybe more stranger things or just super common things, we're going to have guys that are interested in maybe doing an episode or maybe a short clip about something like that. And it really does get to showcase the wide range of guys we have, but also the quality of guys that we have.
Exactly. And you're going to just tell your stories, and I think that's what's so interesting. That's how we promote Vocations.
Exactly.
Okay? So that's not any different from now, the 1990s when I was doing this, are 100 years ago. It's always about inviting, but people are going to respond because they hear the story of a priest. And I think that's what you're going to be doing, and that's what's exciting. But also, you're going to, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to also tell people that are wondering, especially young people, really what happens in the life of a seminary. It's like, well, what is it like? What do you do?
We get that question a lot.
Of course you do. And I think it's just, you can't tell it enough.
Right.
It's so important, not just to show, we're normal college students in many ways, but yet you're not.
Right.
I mean, you are, you're challenged. You want to develop your spiritual life. You're developing your prayer life. You look at your own hunger for God. That's what others that are, I think, watching this podcast, they have the same hunger.
Right.
There are a lot of those that are experiencing maybe great paying jobs, just as some of you had as well, and you realize it's not enough.
Right.
So it's like, how do you fill that hunger if material possessions isn't going to fill it? If even just relationships, maybe you haven't found that one special person, you realize maybe that's not my calling. Maybe I'm supposed to give myself to God and to His people, and you're going to explore those kinds of things as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, certainly. And I think something, Diego, you mentioned earlier, you were talking about that seminarians come from families. And Bishop Gary, I've heard in your own story and witness about your family, that you came from a really beautiful, beautiful Catholic family, and how that's strengthened you in your faith, and that has brought you to where you are today. And so the same idea here, in the sense of the seminarians sharing with the people in the Archdiocese about who we are, because we're family with them. We're all part of the same family. And so allowing them to get to know us and hear our story in a way they may not have before podcasting was possible, right? Exactly. And so the goal certainly here is that they might come to know us and we might come to know them. So when we go out to the parishes, when we engage in ministry, when we're an MC at a Mass, we can encounter the people of God and already have this special relationship with them, a connection in which they know who we are. And we start to share even more about our testimony and our story. And they get to see those men are in formation for the local church to serve and minister to the people here. We can think of grandparents or parents thinking, these are the future priests who will minister to my child or my grandchild.
That's right.
And so already to create that bond and that connection with the people of God is honestly one thing that has me most excited about this initiative and this ministry that we're embarking on, creating this podcast to share a little bit about who we are with the people.
Right.
Definitely. And I think also this element of being transparent as well. Right. That we're not just hiding behind the walls of the seminary.
That's right.
We're like, oh, you only see us in cassock and praying and stuff like that. No, like you'll see us in shorts. You'll see us doing all kinds of things. And that's something that I think a lot of people, especially young men that are maybe considering priesthood, they hunger for, like you were saying, Bishop. They hunger to see something real. That sometimes we can kind of put on a show, maybe in some of the videos we do or some of the pictures we do, where it makes us seem like saints. But in reality, we're all just in the process to getting there.
Absolutely, because we never want to hide behind the collar. I mean, I hope as your director of seminarians that I can help all of you to understand that as well, that we wear a collar and we're proud to wear it as priests, but we don't hide behind it. It is about transparency, as Diego indicated. It's about being who we are, who God has created us to be as human beings, healthy men in body, mind, and spirit, that have hobbies and different interests. And I mean, I like to paddleboard, and people are always surprised. Oh, do you paddleboard like this? No, I don't, because when I was in the parish, because I spent most of my priesthood has been as a parish priest, and so they would see me riding my bike, or I've run marathons, and they saw me in a different context. It wasn't being disrespectful at all to the office. It was showing that there's that human element of who we are. We want healthy men to be priests.
Absolutely.
We don't want someone that's just going to pray all the time, because there are other aspects of priesthood. We don't want someone that doesn't pray either. We want someone that has balance. And I think that's these 19 seminarians here that I know in this archdiocese are seeking that balance, want to be healthy men and want to be able to live the gospel and inspire others to do the same and be good leaders in parishes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you speak about that balance, Bishop, and I'll be honest, like before I came into seminary, I just completed my first year in seminary formation. And so you speak about that balance. That was not something I was conscious of before beginning seminary formation. So then my hope in one way is that we might be able to communicate that to the people of God, sharing a little bit about our life as seminarians. What does that look like? And how do we strive to create that balance? And to be healthy men, if the Lord's calling us to priesthood as we continue our discernment process here, that we might share that then with the people of God, and hopefully inspire other young men who are considering, who are maybe on the fence or a little maybe timid, or there's some fear, that they might hear our story and hear our experience and be then inspired to reach out and to continue to discern.
Absolutely. It's always about telling the story. And we encourage others that are listening to come to tell their story. Because that story that you tell may be the very story that's going to lead you to the seminary one day.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that's something that we talk about a little bit in some of the episodes. This idea of the story, and how when we're truly living our life for Christ, and we're truly finding what it is that He has made us to be, God has made us to be, then that is when we're doing what we need to do to be saints. And we talked about that in the Saints podcast. That's it. That's what you got to do.
All of us.
Exactly. And so it's a matter of another way I see when we say the word balance, I think of whole, being whole, because we talk about it in another series about the formation and the different aspects of formation, that those all need to be balanced, or those all need to be whole, because then if not, I think of it because I like to make pizza. And so sometimes I'll make the pizza and then like it'll slip or whatever happens when I'm cooking it. And then instead of getting a round, nice circle pizza, I get like dents in it, or like a whole piece is like missing. I'm like, oh no, like it's not whole. And so for me, in my mind, like I need the whole pizza, because if not, I can't call it a pizza, because pizzas aren't shaped this way that I make them, but rather they're whole.
But the acceptance that Christ gives to us, and that understanding that sometimes we're like the pizza that you create that's maybe not perfect. The fact is, it's still good though.
Yes.
You know? And so that means we can't be afraid of our own brokenness. We can't be afraid of telling the story that includes brokenness in our lives, because that's how we become stronger. And that passage, people, I think so often they misunderstand Jesus saying, you must be perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect. Doesn't mean we're going to be without sin. Only Jesus is without sin, but it's perfect meaning, someone once interpreted that word for me as meaning whole.
Right.
It means you must be whole. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with just our whole being.
Absolutely.
And that's the wholeness in the midst of the brokenness at times.
Yeah, I mean, I love this concept, of course, of storytelling, and a podcast is such a fitting platform to do that. We can also think about in our own experiences, and I've heard this many times from the men here at Assumption Seminary, and during their discernment process, finding people's stories online about their vocational journey, their discernment process. In some ways, cyber discernment, as I've heard it called before.
Oh, that's great. I've never heard that before. I'm going to remember that. That's good.
So before they've ever reached out to like the vocations director, or actually contacted a person, they're online. You know, they're online and looking around at different religious orders, dioceses, the formation process. And so to then insert ourselves into that space, which I think Pope Benedict had called it the digital continent. We need evangelizers on the digital continent. And so to know that we're also out there sharing our story with the people digitally. Then, as I said earlier, to have that connection then in person as well. Following up with that story when we encounter the people out there. And Archbishop is such a great shepherd, and he's constantly challenging us and encouraging us to go and be with the people.
That's right.
And so we're certainly seeking to do that in as many ways as we possibly can. And Bishop Gary, we appreciate your challenge for us to do now this digital space in a different way, and to share our story and to talk about our
Absolutely.
experience.
I mean, that's what's exciting to know that we pray that those in the college level, university level, those in high schools right now, if you're listening to this podcast from classrooms, from your bedroom because the door's closed and you don't want anyone to know that you're even thinking about ever being a priest.
Right.
And you do it in the privacy of your own bedroom, and that's okay. But that we can do it. You can't go out and tell your story. Only 19 of you, and there's 170 parishes, and we have universities and so many Catholic schools. There's only 19 of you. But you can tell your story in this digital manner, and that's what's important. Because I think if Jesus walked on this earth right now in physical form, he would be making a podcast. But he would still be inviting, but he would still be there with them. So therefore, they come to get to know you and your stories. And those that feel called, they're going to meet you one day. Because guess what? What hasn't changed, we still have a need, and our vocation office is ready to go. Come and see weekends that we have scheduled, and discernment opportunities, life awarenesses in January. We can learn about all kinds of religious communities as well as Archdiocese of Ministry. So all of those are in place. They were around when I was vocation director in 1990. That hasn't changed because you need to be physically be present. But we want people that are listening right now to know that you can do this in the privacy and the secrecy of your own room, and know through your prayer life that maybe God's calling you, and you're going to have that courage to be able to say, I'm going to go to that retreat. I'm going to go to that come and see weekend.
Definitely.
And,
good.
And in addition to that, I'm repeating myself here, but like that those young men who are out there cyber discerning might encounter then our content online. And so when they come to a come and see weekend, they know us. They've already seen us online. They've heard our story, and there's already a connection there, which I think can be really, really powerful.
For sure. And I think to go back to something that you said earlier, this is a story that we don't get tired of telling, these stories that we tell. And so it's not like that we're only posting these podcasts so that we never have to say it again. But we're going to re-encounter people that maybe have only heard us once or have heard somebody else but haven't heard us.
That's right.
And so we get to retell those stories, and that's something that I think is funny whenever you get to encounter this great culture that we have here in San Antonio of Catholics, that like you, especially for seminarians, we have to have our vocation story like down to an elevator talk because we get asked so many times like, oh, what made you think of being a priest? And so you kind of have to be like, oh, well, so, and you get it down to a science. But we really don't get tired of telling that story because that's who we are.
That's right. Because that's the first thing when I met all of you. The first thing I asked you was your name and then tell me your story.
Right.
I want to know your vocation. Because it is interesting, it's intriguing, and it's our call. And so I've told it how many times since I've been a seminary? I mean, more than 40 years ago, and it's you never get tired of it because it's our God story.
Exactly.
It's how God has called us, and that's great to hear it. But that's everyone wants to know your story.
Right.
Absolutely. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah, and it's also always evolving as well.
Yeah,
Because
certainly.
then
Yeah.
for myself, after finishing 2 years so far in the seminary, after 1 year, the story has changed because there's elements that have added or elements that I've discovered.
That's right. That's right.
After seeing it, and then after the second year as well, or different events that have happened in the 2 years in seminary that I can also include and be like, oh, this happened when I was a child, and now in the seminary, I can reflect upon it and tell that in my story whenever I'm talking to people about my vocation story, because then they can say, oh, like, I had the same feeling as a kid, or whatever it might be. There's something in the story that they can relate to. And I think that's something that we hope for this podcast to do, is that this isn't just the end all of podcasting or telling vocation story, but this continues the conversation, right? This gets it going. Or if maybe your call isn't to the Archdiocese of San Antonio, this at least gives you an opportunity to relate to some guys that are going through the same thing. And if that leads you a different way, then as long as we're being part of your journey, that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. That's God's plan.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we'll have a lot of opportunities on this podcast to share many vocation stories.
Right.
A little bit what makes Some Seminarians Podcast different from other podcasts out there is that we're not necessarily assigning one host to the entire series or season, if you will, but rather we're inviting every seminarian from the Archdiocese of San Antonio to sit at this table to have a conversation about many different topics, as you mentioned earlier, Diego, and to share their story. We're looking also to just expand into different kinds of series within the podcast. So maybe looking at some in-depth interviews with our seminarians, getting them to share a little bit more about their story, about their journey from when they grew up to college experience, work experience, and then now here at the seminary. I'm sure we'll come up with many more ideas to cover.
Right.
I would love to see, some guests. Right now we have Bishop Gary with us, but, we have Archbishop Gustavo, maybe Bishop Mike.
I hope he's listening.
And others within the vocations team, or others who've answered their call to the priesthood, religious life. And so we have many priests, like you mentioned, Bishop Gary, here in the diocese who have really wonderful stories. They're wonderful men of God who are shepherding the people here in our local church. So maybe introducing them also on the podcast. So we definitely want to use this as an avenue to communicate to the people here in the Archdiocese so that they can get to know who we are and a little bit more about our stories, and encourage those young men that are listening, hopefully, that they might respond to that call as well. And so parents, if you're listening to this, grandparents, if you're listening to this, know that we're praying for you and for your sons and daughters, that they may respond to their vocational call as well. And please pray for us, right?
Yes. Pray for them.
Yes. And I think that's something that, as you're mentioning, Moses, like these different ideas that we have for series or whatever it is, we've been blessed to have a group of guys that are so creative, that are so innovative of thinking, okay, what should we do? But at the same time, we have such a great opportunity here with what we're doing to continue to do that, not only within our own group, but also everybody watching, that they can comment like, oh, this is something that I really enjoy seeing. And that allows us to be like, okay, do we have the time and resources to do it? And if we can, we definitely want to do it, because we know that we don't have all the answers, all the ideas, and the majority the majority of those are going to come from those people watching.
Right.
And so they're going to have the brilliant ideas that keep this thing going, and hopefully create greater exposure for a culture of vocations, especially in San Antonio. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I'm definitely looking forward to this, and maybe Bishop Gary will have you on more and more in the future.
If you want to, that's fine. I don't know why, but okay.
to follow up on where we are and what we've done within the vocations ministry within the Archdiocese. I know there's a lot going on, and you mentioned some of these retreats and come and see weekends and things. All those different ministries that the Vocations Office puts on. You can definitely find us on our website, on the archsa.org website under Vocations, and see all of our events that are coming up, and sign up for our newsletters to always be in touch and in the know. Certainly, all of our social media platforms as well carry all the information that anyone could ever need in regards to vocations.
And in a future podcast, perhaps those of you that have gone through the Discernment House, and we have a Discernment House here at the seminary. So for those that are more serious about this, ready to go to that next level, but yet not ready to, sign on the dotted line, so to speak. Maybe they want to really figure out, is this what God is asking me to do?
Exactly.
So we have a discernment house in which men actually live here on the seminary campus for a period of time, and just kind of get to know the seminarians, know their way of life, but more importantly, they have their own process of discernment, where they pray and they study, and they discern that possible call. So maybe in the future, those of you that have gone through the discernment house that we have in the Archdiocese, you can kind of tell that story, because that's like 2 or 3 podcasts on themselves. Because it's, what do you do when you actually leave the workforce for a while?
Yeah.
Right? You know that, Moses.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I don't think you went through it,
No.
Diego. Okay, so you did. There are a few other. It's like, what did that take to leave your job and to come? Or we encourage, if you have a job, you would live here though. You live here for a while. So it doesn't mean you have to quit your job, but there are different ways of doing it. We've got some that we're still finishing their college degrees, and they lived here as well. So it'd be very informative as to what a discernment house looks like here.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
We definitely have. We've put in a small conversation in one podcast regarding the Discernment House. But to your point, Bishop Gary, I think it's really important that we continue to share with the people the different ways that the Vocations Office is journeying with young men who are discerning their vocation through ministries such as this podcast, through the Discernment House, through the Come and See weekends. Definitely within the Archdiocese, we want to build this culture of vocations.
Right, exactly.
We want to build that culture and invite young men to take that leap of faith, dare to be great, and to discern well, and to know there's a group of people, and I'd say there's a large group of people who are willing to journey with these young men.
Absolutely, I think so too. And sometimes we forget what has never changed is that invitation. And then also, just a question, have you ever thought about being a priest? I don't know how many times people have noticed maybe a young man that was in the choir, or he's a lecturer, or he's helping around the parish or in the community. And how many times it's made a difference. They told me these stories. I know them. And many of these men are now priests. They said, I'm a priest today because God kind of tapped me on the shoulder, so to speak, through that woman or that man that said, have you ever thought about being a priest? Gosh, you'd make a fine priest. And they said, you know what? I never really even thought about it. Or I thought about when I was a young boy or whatever. It was that question, have you ever thought about being a priest, that made a difference. It means someone noticed what they were doing. So it's like that never changes. Is that simply asking the question of men that you see that you think would make good priests. Maybe that's all they need. It's just to be asked the question.
Certainly. This podcast does not replace the personal invitation.
Absolutely
right?
not. Of course
so
not.
everyone listening.
Just gets us dialoguing.
Exactly.
Talking,
Exactly. So everyone listening, as you mentioned, Bishop Gary, if there's is there a young man out there who you see, please extend the invitation to consider.
That's right.
Certainly.
Definitely. And I think that's what we're really trying to do here, is not replace that personal aspect, but rather to give another resource or to maybe create a platform to springboard that conversation. And so with that, it's not only our podcast, but we're also trying to get a more we're trying to create a presence on Facebook as well, on Instagram, on YouTube even. And so that's really the point of all of this, is to create a centralized place, especially for the Archdiocese of San Antonio, to where we can have those guys that are interested in joining us, or maybe at least journeying with us, that they can have somewhere to go and with resources to go to. And it's not, as sadly is the case so often, that guys are just kind of scrambling and like, I had this feeling, but what do I do with it?
What do you do with it?
And so this is us kind of being like, well, here's what we have, here's what we can help you with. And then also extending the hand to say, if you'd like to personally talk to us, that opportunity is there as well.
That's right. Yeah, I think cyber discernment.
That's exactly it.
I like that term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. It's great. So we're just happy. We're praying. We ask you to pray for us, for these seminarians, but we're praying for you. You may not even know God's calling you to be a priest, but God knows what He's doing.
Absolutely. So we'll definitely invite anybody listening or watching to like our Spotify, to follow us on Spotify, as well as YouTube. On YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, push the notification bell so you know anytime a new episode is up or anytime we post just a short clip. on Facebook and Instagram as well. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and please engage us. Talk to us, comment, DM us, whatever it might be, and we'll do our best to listen to what you have to say, and also hopefully meet you sometime and get the chance to chat, and also to get to know you personally as you're getting to know us here as well.
That's great.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, thank you again, Bishop Gary, for joining us.
Most welcome.
you.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, Moses as well. Thank you.
course.
It was a great conversation, and we're hoping that conversation continues with everybody online. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.